We're interviewing Leo Gold at his office at 350 Bedford Street in Stamford, Connecticut. Good morning, Leo.
Good morning, Lester.
Thank you for participating in this project. We really want people to know what it was like growing up in Stamford because there's been such dramatic change over the years. And I know that you weren't born here. Where were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York, but came to Stamford when I was less than 1 year old.
What year was that?
That would have been 1928.
Okay, so you were born in 1927.
That's correct.
Yeah. And did your parents live in Bridgeport when you told me you first settled in Bridgeport?
No, I didn't settle in Bridgeport. We came directly to Stamford from New York. And my parents opened a Italian-American grocery store on the west side, on West Main Street in Stamford in 1928. And they were, I believe, one of three Jewish families that operated Italian-American grocery stores in Stamford at that time. The others being the Anger family, who had a store up Upper West Main Street, and the Greenberg family, who had a similar store on Pacific Street in Stamford.
And where did your parents immigrate from?
My parents came from Austria. My mother came over in 1914, and we're not sure of the date of my father coming over.
Do you know when your mother and father were born or where they were born?
Well, they were both born in Austria, and insofar as my mother, we believe, was 1898. My father, we're not certain, but believe it was sometime in the early 1890s.
And where did you live when your parents had that store?
Well, we lived in two places. One was on West Main Street in a building owned by a Jewish family known as Levy's. And after a short while, we moved to Greenwood Hill, which was also near the store, in a four-family house on Greenwood Hill, also known as 34 Greenwood Hill.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any siblings?
I had a sister, Jean, and lived in that apartment on Greenwood Hill for quite a few years. And my parents used to walk to the store, and it was operated as a mom and pop store in those days.
So growing up on the west side, what was your childhood like?
Well, I recall going to all the various Stamford schools. Went to Stevens School, which is now the home of the Yearwood Center. And from there, when I got out of the 6th grade, we moved to junior high school, as it was called then. And I went to Clunan School, which was at that time located on Henry Street in the South End. And from there, after finishing there, I went on to Stamford High School and graduated in 1945.
In your experiences in the Stevens School and the other schools, were there many other Jewish kids, or did you find any anti-Semitism when you were going to school?
Actually, there was no other Jewish kids in my classes, as I recall. There was a little anti-Semitism in the form of words, not in the form of fists. But then in junior high school, there were a couple of incidents where it almost came to fists, but nothing of a serious nature.
And as a young adult, did you find that there were a lot of social activities centered around the Jewish community? Were you active in any of those?
Well, in those days, the Jewish Center was the hub of many activities. In fact, that's where my Hebrew school education took place, in the old Jewish Center on Prospect Street. And I had my bar mitzvah training there, and eventually was bar mitzvahed at the old Gutter Sholem on Grove Street. And I recall in those days, since it was very close to, we were just coming out of the Depression, that people really didn't have much in the way of assets. So the bar mitzvah party consisted of Hershey bars at the door as the kids left the shul.
And right after high school, what track did your life take?
Well, 4 days after I finished high school, Uncle Sam beckoned, and I went in to a military service at that time. And I might add that we had a very fine woman who sent all the boys going off to service with special packages. That was a Mrs. Plotnick, who was at the train station as all the boys went off to service. I happened to go up to Fort Devens in Massachusetts, and from there I went to Camp Croft in South Carolina. I had my basic training at Camp Croft, and then after a short period of at home, we went overseas, and I wound up in Germany.
And what was your position, or your rank, and what were you doing?
Rank was not high. Rank was a private, and most of the things I was doing when I was in Germany were related to doing guard duty in connection with captured German soldiers, and that was consisted of what I did most of the time. One of the interesting things that I did was I and a group of other soldiers put up a number of tents for the survivors of the Holocaust, and they moved into these tents because I was there in 45 and 46, just as the war had ended, and I got to talking to a lot of the survivors, and my recollection of that was that many of them had relatives in the States, and they asked me to bring messages to some of the people in the New York area, which when I got out of service I did, telling them that their relatives were still alive, and brought some notes that they had sent. And that was an interesting experience. Incidentally, I told a class, I took a class recently at UConn on the Holocaust, and I told my classmates that story also.
How were you able to communicate? Did they speak English, or were you able to speak Hebrew or Yiddish?
Yiddish was the main speaking vehicle. I was able to speak and understand Yiddish because my parents spoke Yiddish, as well as a number of other languages, including they were fluent in Italian because they operated this Italian grocery store.
And after you were discharged from the Army, What year was that when
I-
you got your honorable discharge?
Yes, I did get an honorable discharge. When I got out of service, I did work. I worked in a shoe store selling shoes until I was admitted to New York University, and I went to college at NYU from 47 to 51. And I majored in journalism there. I might add that I left out something of my earlier days in that insofar as the grocery store was concerned, at a very young age, I was delivering orders for my parents into the West Side and to the Waterside sections of Stanford. And so I worked from a very early age.
Yeah, going back a minute, you mentioned that you worked in a shoe store.
Yeah, that was in 46, 47.
Who were the proprietors of the shoe store?
Well, that was National Shoes,
They were on
which was on
Atlantic
Atlantic Street. And the manager of the store was someone by the name of David Pilson. And I worked there for a number of years while I was going to college, and I continued to work there even after I graduated college, because at that time, since I majored in journalism, I got a job at WSTC, which was a radio station in Stanford, as a news writer. And for a number of years, I wrote news from, my time was from 5:45 in the morning until shortly before 1 p.m. And at 1 p.m., I went over to the shoe store to work till 9 p.m. So I had, in effect, 2 full-time jobs at that time. For a number of years, I did that. And then
While you were working,
Yeah.
do you remember how much you made a week? What was
Yeah,
it? Was it commissions?
it was commissions plus a salary. And my recollection is I earned approximately $65 to $70 a week, both salary and commissions.
Yeah. And what was I'm sorry. What was the tuition that you had to pay at school?
Well, at NYU, I got a free ride because of the GI Bill of Rights. So they paid pretty much everything, except I had commutation to pay. And there were a number of other Stanford young men who were on the train with me each morning, because I didn't stay in New York. I came home each night or each afternoon. And one of my close friends was Ray Lotstein from the Lotstein family. He was the youngest son and one of the earliest to die. So Ray and I were great friends. Now,
You mentioned that you lived in Bridgeport for a while.
well, that was after I got married.
Where did you meet your wife?
Well, I met her in Bridgeport, and after I got married in 1954, and actually I knew my wife for about 2 years, and in 1954 she had an aunt who had a 6-family house on Charles Street in Bridgeport, and we took one of those apartments and lived there, and had 2 children born there in a small apartment. My oldest son, David, who was born there and went a couple of years to school there, and then wound up doing most of his schooling in Stanford. then went on to Lafayette College and University of Connecticut Law School, and now is a sitting judge sitting in Hartford. So that takes care of him. After finishing, I decided to change jobs in 1955 and took a job with the Bridgeport Sunday Herald, a newspaper that you probably never heard of, you're too young. And for that paper, I covered Stanford. They had what was known as the Stanford Bureau. And I came to Stanford each day and worked. We had a little office in Stanford and produced copy for the Stanford edition. I continued to work for the Herald for approximately 2 years, and then I decided to go to law school after being out for 6 or 7 years after finishing college. And I went to New York Law School, daytime session, and I commuted from Bridgeport to New York and was able to complete my classes at 12 o'clock each day, and then took a train back to Stanford because I continued working for the Herald, and then took a 5 or 6 o'clock train back to Bridgeport each day. So I did a lot of traveling between those cities. And by going to 2 summer sessions, I was able to finish in 2 years. So,
you mentioned one of your children as a judge, and
yeah.
you also, if you'll back up a moment, on your other child, and what was your wife's maiden name?
Her maiden name was Wittenberg, and her family was Bridgeport oriented.
And her first name?
Sandra.
Mm-hmm.
And she has one brother, Edwin. My other 2 children are Susan, who lives in Torrance, California, has 2 children out there. And my youngest son is John, who lives in Westport. And incidentally, on Thursday I'm going to California to see them. That's the family. At any rate, I finished law school towards the end of '59, was admitted to the bar of the state of Connecticut in 1960, and began practicing law on my own for about 2 or 3 years. And then I teamed up with one of the great guys of Stanford, who you really missed an opportunity by not taking his life story. That was Isidore Mackler, who not only was probably one of the great lawyers of Stanford, as well as a CPA, but he was
corporation counsel for the city.
That's correct, for a number of years. Yeah. He served as the city attorney. But one of the things that in his death that most people don't know about is that he was probably one of the most generous people that came out of Stanford, in that substantial sums of money go to a number of universities for scholarships for young people who are striving to get through college and who are striving to get through law school in difficult economic times. And I am one of the directors of a Isidore Mackler Foundation, which together with his daughter and my youngest son, we're the directors, and we distribute large sums of money to these various schools each year.
I might mention that the Jewish Historical Society is one of the recipients of his generosity, and I knew Isidore very well, and my mother often told me what dire circumstances he grew up in as a child, so I can understand why he has left the funds for people who were wanting an education and couldn't afford it.
Yeah. Well, and besides the foundation, he also left a substantial amount of money to the Jewish Foundation, which distributes funds to a number of different organizations. So, all in all, he was just a terrific individual, and although he was in his 80s when he died too soon.
Yeah. How long were you fellows partners?
We were partners for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I can truthfully say we never had an argument. And it was just a tremendous legal and social partnership.
I know I've seen pictures in our archives of sports activities that you participated in.
Yeah, I played a lot of softball with the Jewish Center teams during the 40s, and we had a lot of what you might call intramural games in back of the Stanford High School, where every Sunday morning maybe 40 or 50 of us would get out there and choose up sides and play ball, and then we were entered into many of the city leagues, and we played ball there. So.
And do you consider yourself semi-retired now, or do you still work every day?
No, I work every day.
Yeah.
Some people around here think I'm semi-retired, especially when I go home early. But I also did a lot of sports writing, so that was for the Jewish Center and even for the Bridgeport Herald when I worked there. I did some sports writing. What else?
Were there any other activities that focused around the Jewish Center that you were involved in?
Well, of course, the old Jewish Center was the center of activities for many young people. I believe that the center, that building on Prospect Street, was one of the first to have a swimming pool. And I recall when I was in high school, the center and the high school had an arrangement where the young people would come down to swim at the center high school, because the high school was just right up the street from the center. And of course, the center also had a bowling alley. Were you ever in the bowling alley?
Yeah, I used to set pins up, nickel a game.
Oh, really? Yeah. Okay, well, you know, Pete Westman used to operate it.
You had a billiard parlor there.
And there was
as well.
a billiard parlor 1 floor up. And so that was where we met and had a lot of fun there.
You have an opportunity to do any traveling, or do you, other than going, you just mentioned you're going to visit?
Yeah, my daughter
Your
and
daughter.
grandchildren. We haven't done too much traveling. I've been in Israel twice, and planning on going again in, I believe, October. Once to England, and that's about the big trips. I've been to Florida a few times, California a number of times, made a lot of trips in connection with my law practice when there were conventions in various cities. So I've been in a lot of different cities: San Francisco, Los Angeles, St. Louis, many cities that had that were big enough to take care of conventions.
In your law practice, did you specialize in any specific area of law?
Well, in my younger days, I did a lot of litigation. I was in court a lot, and as I got older, that tailed off, and I did real estate, probate, commercial transactions. So that was pretty much where I was.
And what are you doing now? What is there any specific area?
Well, I still do an occasional litigation matter. I still do real estate. I still do an assortment of what we call civil matters. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I manage to keep busy.
Do you have any hobbies or special interests outside of your law practice and your family?
Not too many hobbies. I do watch and occasionally go to baseball games or football games or something like that. But I don't have a major hobby, and that's why I continue to practice law, which has in effect become a hobby.
In your adult years, were you active in any of the religious organizations, or synagogue or temples? Or?
Well, at one time I was on the board of directors at Temple Bethel. Mm-hmm. I also served as president of the Jewish Center.
What year was that?
Sometime in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall the exact date.
Was that in the Jewish Center, then on Prospect Street?
That was on Prospect Street. I was president when we first made and started raising funds for the new center. Mm-hmm. So we raised some monies to begin the job of moving to Newfield Avenue.
And were there other organizations that you were involved in? Any political or religious or professional organizations?
Well, I've been a member of the Bar Association. There's several committees, one of which was a committee called the Client Security Fund, which I was a member of for 10 or 15 years. That was a committee that collected funds and then paid out funds to people who were victimized by lawyers who absconded with their funds. Mm-hmm. So that was something that I did for a good number of years.
Are there any reflections of what you have done in your lifetime that you feel you've contributed to the community or to society that left an indelible impression on you?
Well, I don't know whether I'd go that far, but I did recently attend the 50th reunion of my law school and got a pin there for that. And sometime next year, if I'm still around, I should be getting a 50-year pin from the Bar Association.
Oh, that's great.
So those are two occasions that one can think about. I don't know how momentous, but nonetheless, it was done. I can't think of anything else other than to say that in thinking back of my youth, I do recall walking to school in my early years walking up the hill to Stevens School and going to the store cash register to get a penny to get candy in one of the candy stores on the way up. I can say that my sister and I never realized how poor we were. And that didn't begin to change until sometime in the early to mid 40s when the country started to come out of the Depression. We lived in various locations. For a few years we lived on Anderson Street, which is off West Broad Street near the hospital. We also lived on Division Street for a while. We bought a home on Fenway Street, which is in back of Stanford High School. Lived there for a few years. And then after getting married and living in Bridgeport for a few years, we came to Stanford and moved into a home on Woodway Road in Stanford, which was one of the first of the Fieber and Lamke homes, all electric, and lived there for approximately 7 years, and then moved into a home on Fishing Trail in Stanford and lived there for more than 30 years, and eventually came down to live in town at the Buckingham, where we are now living, and have lived there for about 9 years.
When you were active on the baseball teams, do you recall any of the local fellows who were playing with you?
Yeah, sure. We had, there were a couple of Myers boys, Gene Myers and Sid Myers, both of whom were pitchers. We had someone by the name of Bob Cooper. Shelley Lefferman was there. Donnie Lazarus, who is still in Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
Allie Alter, who played not only the baseball but also basketball. Jack Gordon, Heshy Knopp was one of the younger members. So those are some of the names that I can recall at the moment. There were others. And so.
Are there any other reflections of your life that you'd like to say for posterity on this interview?
Well, something interesting comes to mind. My father was attending a meeting at the Jewish Center and had a heart attack and died there. That was in 1956.
How old was your dad?
Early 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And I bring that up because I myself have had 2 heart attacks, both at the Jewish Center. And the first one, which was a major one, I was fortunate enough to be playing paddleball at the Jewish Center at the time, and so was Dr. Schuster and Dr. Benjamin. And they worked on me until EMS came to the center, and I understand that that was one of the first EMS savings that took place, because I was able to come out of it, and although I did stay at the hospital for 16 or 18 days, and
What year was that?
that was in 1988.
That's at the New Jewish Center.
That would have been at the New Jewish Center, right? And then I was under the care of a good name for Stanford, Dr. Lloyd Fisher, who was an internist in Stanford for many years before retiring. And I remained in fairly good health until a second incident at the Jewish Center, and then again I was hauled up to the hospital. Subsequently, I've had some bypass surgery down at Columbia Presbyterian in New York, and after that I had a pacemaker defibrillator implanted, also at Columbia Presbyterian, so I'm walking with hardware in me. That is some of the heart-related matters.
Well, that proves that modern medicine does well if you have the right people in attendance.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Now, is there anything else I should tell you? I can't think of anything else except to tell you that in my high school class, there were some notable people. One was Alan Nevis, who became a federal court judge. Michael Sherman, who became a workers' compensation commissioner. Our class president was a general in the Army.
What was his name, do you recall?
Joe, I believe it was Joe Ulatowski, but I'm not certain of the last name.
I think you're right.
You remember that name?
Yeah, he was from the South End. He was a Polish boy.
Yeah.
His father was an Iceman.
Okay, so that's who became a general, and we sort of try to have reunions every 5 years, and one should be coming up shortly. Hopefully it'll be in the afternoon, and so that takes care of some of the high school.
So what do you think, with all the changes you've seen in Stanford, do you think that it's for the better or for the good old days were better?
Well, you can't stop progress, but I could relate a couple of things about the old days. Perhaps that'll surprise some of the younger people who are unaware of these things, because I always like to talk about the fact that we used to attend circuses at the where Ridgeway Center is now, and before that, Gail's shaking her head. You don't remember that. You're too young.
Yeah.
And before that, we had some up at Ladden's Rock, which is up near the Greenwich line, circuses there. Ridgeway, I believe, was built in the early 1940s. That's a group of stores that are still there, standing almost 70 years. So that's one of the earlier big things that happened in Stanford. since that time, and of course, I should mention that there was really nothing too much going on north of Bull's Head. That whole area, everything north of Bull's Head, the housing that went on and all of the shopping centers and all, that came after. Now,
If you recall, I might mention that downtown were all family-operated stores, and I would guess that maybe 60% of them were Jewish family-owned.
yeah, there were many Jewish family-owned stores on Pacific Street especially, where I recall my parents walking to Pacific Street from the store on West Main Street to pick up the meat because they were kosher. There were 3 or 4 kosher markets. There were several Jewish stores that featured the pickles and the various cream cheeses and things of that nature. There were 1 or 2 restaurants. There was some woman by the name of Ma Falk who was involved in either catering or in something like that, and taking care of the kids at Camp JC, I'm sure. There was a Jewish delicatessen store on, had several locations. The one I recall in the 50s was on Main Street near Park Row, where Meyer Bloomfield operated a kosher deli. And I do recall walking over there to get lunch from the shoe store that I worked at.
Yeah, that was called the Square Deli.
That's
It
right.
was on Atlantic Square.
Yeah, and I remember the sign in the window, 65 cents for a 4-course meal, a soup sandwich, and a dessert and tea. So if you think back to what 65 cents could buy you. And so that was good. Now, what has happened since then is that we've had some tall buildings that have been built. The first one of large proportions is at Landmark Square, and one that'll probably top that is now in building shape, the Trump Tower. And we've had some others not so tall, but that's what's going on. A lot of housing has been built. Whether or not there will be enough people to rent the housing or buy the condos remains to be seen at this time in 2009.
Do you think that if these that are ready for occupancy, if they are all rented or bought, the traffic conditions are going to be impossible?
It will be difficult to get around downtown, that's for sure. And there's been very little thought from the standpoint of government about what to do with all of these buildings. It's easy to give approval, but to figure out what to do with all the people who are going to be around, that's another story. I think that some of the things I don't like the fact that people who own property and who want to build a building can only do so by making contributions to the city in the form of either money or other housing places. I think that that's probably wrong to do. But the developers are so anxious to get going with their projects that they're going along with it.
Well, I want to thank you very much for your time and your input,
Okay?
and wish you many more years of good health.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Leo.
Okay, thanks.